So I saw this one at work when I was, just looking at YouTube videos trying to distract myself from actually working. And I thought this would be a good video to listen to and react to, but just how inbred is this liker of children, I can't say the other word, King Charles.
Out of every video I have ever made, this is undoubtedly my most favourite one to research and make. So make sure you stay tuned. How inbred is King Charles? Very. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm Shy.
All right, well, that's the video, guys. Unfortunately, I don't really have anything else to say, but I told you so, and I knew it. But no, I'm just kidding. Let's continue.
I know. I'm not stopping the video there. King Charles is already known to be quite inbred. Although most people in the UK and beyond know that King Charles is inbred, owing to the fact that his parents were related.
The guy looks like a ghoul. They both look like just inhuman ghouls, man.
To one another, the true scale of his inbreeding is still undisclosed to the public until today. This video will expose the true extent of Charles's inbreeding, and it's really surprising. As such, there are 3 sections to this video. The first part will be theoretical and complex at times, as we detail the consanguinity coefficient. I will break it down as best as possible, and essentially this refers to how inbred someone is. The second part of today's video will detail and break down how inbred King Charles is.
Okay, which makes sense. Like, I guess how inbred the average person is, and then there's King Charles.
Using his genealogy as method, and exposing some of the more forgotten parts of his family history. For example, how his parents are related through multiple lines, and how this influences King Charles's consanguinity coefficient. With all of that out the way, let's move on to today's video. To actually work out how inbred King Charles is, we need to be scientific and use an equation.
I didn't come here for math, boys. Sorry, we're not watching this video anymore.
Working out how inbred someone is actually pretty popular, so there's plenty of guidance online to support this. Nonetheless, I'm going to break it down in simple terms here, how to work out how inbred someone is.
Alright.
To do this, we need to use something known as the coefficient of consanguinity relationship,
oh, jeez.
also known as consanguinity coefficient. This scale is from 0, the least inbred, to 1, which is the most inbred.
Okay.
Which is actually impossible to have. The reason is because in order to have 100% consanguinity, or 1 if we apply the scale, you would have to have a child with yourself, which is biologically speaking impossible for a human to do. Sorry, royalty, you may have power, but you certainly don't have the power to do that. Well, at least not yet.
For real.
However, there are also some other relations where it's possible, sadly, to have children with. If 2 full siblings had a child with one another, despite being illegal in most nations, their child would have a consanguinity coefficient of roughly 0.25.
Oh, wow.
Or 25%. Charles II of Spain had a consanguinity coefficient of 0.25, but his parents were not full siblings to one another.
That's what his parents look like? Jeez, they could be inbred too.
This is because the consanguinity coefficient takes into account all of the inbreeding of the person's ancestors, and this stacks together. For example, if a person was to have a child with their first cousin, their child would have a consanguinity coefficient of 0.07, or 7%.
Okay.
However, if that child then went on to have their own child with a first cousin, this would then increase the consanguinity to roughly 11%.
Oh.
In fact, this table breaks down the basic consanguinity coefficients for certain relationships. So pause the video if you want to research this in greater detail. The reason why we should apply this to King Charles is pretty simple. Royalty, whether it's as old as Tutankhamun or modern day, still engages in inbreeding. Mainly because, until very recently, the correct choice of a consort, whether a queen or prince, should come from royalty, or at least aristocracy. Even though the late Princess Diana was not from royalty, she was the daughter of an earl, and she was in fact a very distant cousin to King Charles.
Oh, more inbreeding.
Even the current queen consort, Camilla, is a secret cousin to King Charles. However, this is an open secret and withheld to the public at large.
It's an open secret and withheld from the public, yet we still know about it.
If you want to know more, please click on this video. So, how inbred is King Charles, given his parents' close relationship? Fortunately, this question can be easily answered.
Okay.
Because Charles is a king, we can locate his family tree very easily. And this is a huge family tree. Unfortunately, to get an accurate assessment of Charles's true inbreeding, we'd have to take into account all of his known ancestors. This is hard since we can trace King Charles's direct ancestry to William the Conqueror in 1066.
That's insane. You know, like for someone's ancestry to be that public and go back that far, that's pretty damn impressive.
And even beyond that. This difficulty then becomes even more complicated, since we have to take into account the inbreeding levels of his ancestors. And as we know, royalty of the past loved to marry their cousins and aunts and uncles. So, for the purposes of this video, let's look at all of Charles's ancestors up to his great-great-grandfather, King Edward VII. The reason why I've selected this is because King Edward VII is known to be an inbred king, since his parents, Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, were first cousins. If we look at Queen Victoria's ancestry, she was not inbred to any particular extent. So we will start from the ancestor of King Charles, which first experienced inbreeding. That is Edward VII. Edward VII was a bizarre king, although his behaviour was not caused by his inbreeding, between hosting 24-course dinners to drinking
24-course dinners, bro? That's insane. Who wants to be at dinner that long? Well, I guess back then you didn't have the entertainment value that we do now, so I guess they didn't really have anything else to do. But I could not, even like a 4-course meal, I'm like, golly, I've been here a long time, you know?
3 bottles of wine daily, to secretly fathering the grandmother to Queen Camilla when he was 60 years old.
Jesus.
Edward VII was not exactly a Victorian monarch. Now, let's refer to his inbreeding. Because he was the product of a first cousin marriage, Edward VII's consanguinity coefficient would be almost 0.07, or 7%, to make things easier. Fortunately for the Windsors, Edward VII was married to a Danish princess, Alexandra, and the two were very distantly related. In fact, they were so distantly related to one another that it's not even worth recording what their relationship is, since their coefficient of consanguinity would be 0%.
Okay.
Princess Alexandra was almost not inbred at all.
Notice the key word he said there was almost.
Her parents were second cousins to one another, as their great-grandmothers were siblings. This meant that Princess Alexandra's consanguinity coefficient was 0.03%, which is very low. Because Alexandra and Edward were almost not related to one another at all, their children would inherit a very low consanguinity coefficient, also known as inbreeding level. The best way to determine this is to go halfway between both parents' inbreeding level, meaning that their son, George V, would have had a consanguinity coefficient of 0.055%. Still very low, all things considered. Now, things will become slightly more complicated. You see, George V married a German princess, Mary of Teck. He wasn't really German. In fact, she was raised in England because her mother, Adelaide of Cambridge, oof, not attractive, pardon me, was a cousin to Queen
That is very rude. She's a very pretty lady. I'm kidding.
Victoria. Now, this is an important detail because this means that Mary of Teck was a first cousin once removed to Queen Victoria, and Mary of Teck was therefore a second cousin to Edward VII, who was to be her father-in-law. Confusing? Yeah, this is royal.
I'm glad he said that, because I was like, I'm lost, but I'm glad he's not the only one who's confused.
Family intermarriage for you. Just wait until my video on the Habsburgs.
Good God.
George V was therefore Mary of Teck's second cousin once removed, which means they had a coefficient of consanguinity of only 0.016, for easier purposes about 2%, incredibly low for royal standards. Because George V had an inbreeding level of roughly 5%, this means that any children he was to have with Mary of Teck would be halfway between this inbreeding level. So the inbreeding level he'd share with Mary of Teck translates to about 3%. This means that their sons, Edward VIII, the one who abdicated the throne to marry Wallis Simpson, and George VI, the father to Queen Elizabeth II, had a very low level of inbreeding, of roughly 2 to 3%. Looks like inbreeding once again cannot be blamed as responsible for Edward VII's irrational behaviour. George VI was an interesting royal. Since his marriage to Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, the future Queen Mother was viewed as unbecoming for a royal in line to inherit. This is because Elizabeth, despite being from aristocracy, was the daughter of a Scottish earl. This is partly a reason as to why George and Elizabeth were not related in any way, shape or form to one another. This meant their two daughters, Princesses Elizabeth and Margaret, were virtually not inbred at all, and had merely 1% consanguinity coefficient.
I wonder what the average level of inbreeding is for a person.
Turns out that our late Queen was one of the least inbred monarchs to have ever reigned over England. But then we had her marriage to Prince Philip, or before his marriage, Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark. This is where things are going to become complicated, so let's make sure you listen carefully if you want to know how inbred King Charles is.
Alright.
Unlike Queen
A ghoul, look at that dude!
Elizabeth II, Prince Philip was unfortunately inbred. This is because of his great-grandparents, and unfortunately for us, he's inbred through multiple lines. For example, Prince Philip's mother was a product of a first cousin marriage. Her grandfathers were brothers. Intermarriage also occurred through another line. Prince Philip's other great-grandfather, King Christian IX of Denmark, was an uncle-in-law to Prince Philip's great-grandmother, Princess Alice of the United Kingdom. In all, Prince Philip was slightly inbred, having a consanguinity coefficient of roughly 6%, almost the same extent of Edward VII, who was the son of a first cousin relationship. Now for the even messier part.
Okay.
Let's take an inbred individual, Prince Philip, and marry him to a non-inbred individual, Queen Elizabeth. Their kids would be fine, right? Wrong. This is because, as many of us know, Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth II were related. On the royal family website, it claims that Philip and Queen Elizabeth are third cousins. Philip's great-grandmother, Princess Alice, was the sister to Queen Elizabeth's great-grandfather, King Edward VII. This means that they are precisely third cousins.
Okay.
But hang on, because of how messy intermarriage in European royal families was since Queen Victoria, Philip and Elizabeth are in fact related through yet another line.
Uh-oh.
Philip's grandfather, King George of Greece, was Princess Alexandra's brother. Remember, she was the wife to Edward VII, and therefore she is the great-grandmother to Queen Elizabeth.
Oh.
Because of this, Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip are also second cousins to one another. At the same time, they are also third cousins. That's some really messy inbreeding right there.
Alright, this is what we came here for.
So, what does this mean when we finally look at King Charles's level of inbreeding? As a base value, we have to go halfway between Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip's inbreeding levels. Halfway between 1% and 7% would be 4%, but because of the interrelationship between Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth, there is yet another consideration. Firstly, the second cousin relationship would mean another 6% of inbreeding, and a third cousin relationship would be another 3% of inbreeding. This means that King Charles's inbreeding level cannot be 4%, because his parents were in fact related to one another in multiple ways. Because of the multiple lines of relationship, this acts as an enhancement to the children's level of inbreeding. So we would, as a base level, combine the second cousin relationship, 6%, and apply that to the third cousin relationship, 3%, which totals to about 9%.
Oh.
Then when we look at the parents, we can see that there are already some trace elements of inbreeding in Prince Philip. As a rough estimation, King Charles's consanguinity coefficient, his level of inbreeding, is anywhere between 9 to 13%.
Jesus, and that's more than anyone that he's referenced so far in this video.
To be precise, Charles's inbreeding level is roughly just over 10%. And there we have it, how inbred King Charles III is. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I had so much fun finding out just how
Yeah, I'm sure you had fun doing all that math, my friend, unless you're a psychopath. That was actually really good. It's just over 10% for being a king is pretty crazy. And the fact that all the shady stuff that man does, it's quite interesting. For those who are wondering why inbreeding is so bad, it's because the increased likelihood of inheriting identical copies of genes from both parents, which could include harmful recessive mutations. To my fellow shy historian, I have a real rough number. The average person has 10,000 discrete and separate ancestors. Charles Winchester has 1,000 discrete and separate ancestors, meaning that he is 10 times more inbred than the average person. That is insane in the membrane, bro. Like, that's fucking crazy. I don't like that. That just blows my mind. So he has 10 times. He's 10 times more inbred than regular people than I am. Well, hopefully, I'm a regular person. I would assume I'm a regular person. You recently did I recently did a DNA test and found some interesting things on one side of my family, which include first and second cousin marriages. They all grew up in small towns in rural America, so I honestly wasn't surprised. It was not as uncommon back in the 16th through 19th century as some people might believe. Some of y'all seem to think that this only happened in America, and I just couldn't imagine being that ignorant. Also, my family's from the rural Midwest, not Alabama. Sorry to disappoint. Okay. It may make you uncomfortable, but as you go back in history, the more closely related people who married tends to be, especially if it's an isolated ethnic group, we're all more closely related than most people ever think about. That's true. Yeah, there was a lot of inbreeding back in the day. I mean, I guess I would assume nearly every family has some of it, so obviously nobody is not 0% inbred. And if that was, that'd be insane. No, that's a very good video. Definitely have that in the description about King Charles and his over 10% inbreed probability.